In order properly to understand the effects of Japanese knotweed, it is necessary to set out some background as to its nature. The Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, published an information paper in 2012, the RICS paper, on Japanese knotweed and residential property. This provides information on the Japanese knotweed problem, the scale of the problem, effective treatment of Japanese knotweed, and assessment framework for Japanese knotweed. The RICS paper describes Japanese knotweed as a hardy bamboo-like perennial plant which grows quickly and strongly and spreads through its underground roots or rhizomes. Rhizomes are similar in their effects to roots, being underground stems which themselves produce fine, white, hair-like roots. Its thick clumps and stands can quickly grow to a height of over 2 meters. The roots can extend up to 7 meters horizontally and 3 meters vertically. The most severe category of risk presented by knotweed is where the knotweed is within 7 meters of a habitable space. The RICS paper states that knotweed can affect drains, patches, paths, drives, boundary walls, retaining walls, outbuildings, conservatories, and gardens. It can block drains, disrupt drains runs, grow between slabs of concrete drives, disrupt brick paving, undermine garden walls, and overwhelm poorly built outbuildings and conservatories. Japanese knotweed was rightly described by the recorder as a pernicious weed. It does not only carry the risk of future physical damage to buildings, structures, and installation on the land. Its presence, and indeed the mere presence of its rhizomes, imposes an immediate burden on the owner of the land in terms of an increased difficulty in the ability to develop and in the cost of developing the land should the owner wish to do so. For all those reasons, Japanese knotweed and its rhizomes can fairly be described, in the sense of the decided cases, as a natural hazard. They affect the owner's ability fully to use and enjoy the land. They are a classic example of an interference with the amenity value of the land. This was an appeal case in the respect of claims of nuisance for the effects of the Japanese knotweed on private properties and the network rail in England. So I've been following the Japanese knotweed as an invasive species and the language, whether visual or textual, was used to describe or to tackle the problem of this invasive plant as it's described or usually described. And I brought here a wide selection of my research material, varying from a more scientific text to literature to images, paper clippings, and dried leaves of the plant itself, stems and nuts from the plant itself, and other visuals from different factors of the story of the Japanese knotweed and how it was brought to Europe back in time or during the Victorian era. So I started with the court case, but mainly I came across the Japanese knotweed as a plant here in the Netherlands in a national park called Veluwe Zoo, and the plant was growing next to the visitor center there, and the guide was speaking about the plant, and this is how I came to know about the plant for the first time. And from there onwards, I started to follow the plant, how it's represented in media, and what people think about it and what they have to say about it. And I've been collecting this material for around 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And where have you been collecting it? Did you encounter this plant? This plant is quite well known in the Netherlands, in UK, but I know you encountered it also in Belgium, and you also like reflected on the different attitudes that humans have towards this plant according to their cultures and the location where the plant grows, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's a culture question or societal question. How does a society deal with the plant? Because through this plant, or through the way a society deals with the plant, like we can learn more about the society itself, about us as people and members of this society. So yeah, first I came across the plant in the Netherlands, and then doing the research, I found a good amount of material online, mainly from England, where the plant has become what's so-called a national threat. And I started to pick up these words and to put them in lists. And I started with some few words. Well, some of them, they come from the field of botany or ethnobotany, but they also go a bit wider, and they remind us of military language or the language that's used to describe the human crisis and its migration. So I started with things like invasive, neophyte, exotic, ruderal, wild, but also door knocker, noxious, insidious, hardy, durable, dormant, menace, untamed, contaminated, encroaching, proactive, hazardous, infesting, stubborn, prolific, arduous, sturdy, risky, and alien. But it goes on and on. I started with this maybe 12 words, but today I have more than 300 of them. And like during this time, the years I've been doing this research, I also traveled with my research, and I could see how each place or country deals with the problem of the Japanese knotweed, or doesn't deal with it. There's a lot of legislation in England. I mean, there are laws against Japanese knotweed. There are fines that could be given to people. For instance, like this one says that homeowners with Japanese knotweed could be fined £2,500 under new rules that class failing to control the problem plant as anti-social behavior. Also, before moving to the Netherlands, also the plant can reduce the economical value of the property, of the private property. As we say, it went to the court. And this is also happening recently in the Netherlands. However, when I was in Dresden in Germany, the plant was growing en masse in the forest and along the water from the river. And I asked one of the forest rangers, like, how come that there's like not so much done? Because like I'm used to see that the plant is really trimmed and cut and covered in the Netherlands. There's always ways to deal with the plant and to try to tame it or to prevent its growth. And there's always new technologies brought on and invented to deal with the plant. Technology is involved. For instance, like here, they reduced the temperature of the soil to -degrees in order to kill or to slow down the growth of the rhizomes and the root system, because this is what causes the problem of the plant. However, back in Germany, so what the forest ranger explained to me, that this plant doesn't present any immediate threat to people. So it's not poisonous, it doesn't kill people. So that's why there's not much done. So in this sense, we could see how different societies deal with their nature.
Yeah, right. These are images, and this is an article from the Dutch press, right?
Yeah.
But as you were explaining, there's also like a magazine over there I can see, where you can really see like also how much effort and energies and infrastructure has been thought in order to eradicate it.
Yeah.
But in order to understand also why this is this plant is considered culturally so scary, and why we need also all these like big machines in order to uproot it. Can we like do a step back and delve into what the plant is, how it looks like, and why it's perceived as so dangerous?
Yeah, the plant basically was brought by a guy named, or he was a physician. He was named Philip von Siebold, and he was hired by King Willem I in the Netherlands to join the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company, to go to an artificial island in Japan, which called Deshima. This island was built by the Portuguese, and then it was taken by the Dutch as a post island. So Van Siebold goes to Japan. He stays there for a couple of years as a physician. He gives his service as a physician or a doctor, and in return he gets gifts or treatments for his treatments, I mean. And the things that he gets: plants, seeds, also artworks. But then he collects books and maps, and when the Japanese authorities knows that he collects maps, he was kicked out of the country because this was offensive. First they thought he was a spy, a Russian spy. Then even approving not, this was offensive, and he's kicked out of the Empire of Japan. And this was kind of a political crack between the Netherlands, or the Kingdom of the Netherlands at that time, and Japan, because the Netherlands was one of the only countries in contact of trading between the Empire of Japan and the West. So von Siebold sails back to Europe, and he brings a lot of plants which he introduces and reintroduces to Europe. And the Japanese knotweed is one of them. And I have to say that these plants are still celebrated as garden ornamental plants up until today. He brought the Japanese knotweed on something called boarding case, or a terrarium, which was invented to bring living specimens or plants from abroad back home. And it's also important to say that von Siebold brought a female specimen of the plant, which means that the plant has been reproducing itself asexually in Europe, northwestern Europe, and Northern America for around almost 200 years now.
As far as you know, do we have then male examples of the plant, or it's still like a female community? It's like a matriarchy.
Yeah, I mean, it's an enigma, I would say, or like something. Yeah, but I think, and what I've read, that it's mainly female plants growing in Europe, and yeah. Can we get the leaves as well? No, the leaves. Sure. Yeah, all of them. So this is the Japanese knotweed, and yeah, that's the hybrid that comes later. So
okay,
a female Japanese knotweed brought by Philip von Siebold meets the giant knotweed, or the Russian or the Sakhalin knotweed. But also Russia is quite big, right? I mean, it's from East Europe till Japan mainly, and it has few islands which are adjacent to Japan. So this comes from the Russian territory, and it's called Russian knotweed, or giant knotweed, or Sakhalin, because the island's called Sakhalin. And they meet in Canada, and they produce a hybrid or bastard in the botany language, which is X Bohemia, it's called. So mainly in Europe we've got these two, and less this one. But I mean, because we've been moving a lot, trading a lot, all of our modern lives are relying on this movement and trading. The plant has been moving as well with us and with our activities. So I believe we do have the three of them, at least in Europe, if not only in Belgium or the Netherlands. But the most common are these two. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you're saying. I think it's very interesting to trace also movements and migration flows through plants. And I see the Shah book here.
Yeah. Actually, it's an interesting way to think about this concept as like where does it come from, this concept of plants moving, or like since when they became a burden and a problem, you know, because nature moves and changes, right? And organisms, they also move as we do move, whether with relying on our activities or not, right? But then this became a concept. I think also, you know, it's becoming a national problem, you know, like of how do we conceive nature, because we have kind of a romantic view how nature should be and how it should look like all the time, and we would like to preserve this, which there's nothing wrong in that, but also this could be unnatural in a way, because nature does change, especially in these days where the climate is changing because of as a result of our activities mainly. So why would we expect nature to stay the same when we caused the climate around it to change all the time? So yeah, this is the concept of migration and how do plants move and become invasive problem mainly. So it's like you can't speak about it from one point, which is like from the botanical point, and not address other problems which are related to society, nationalism, botany, because, you know, like the whole concept of botanical gardens and bringing plants from the colonies back home was during the Victorian era, which you could look at them at the plants, gardening plants and botanical gardens as imperial tools, actually, of power and sovereignty.
Yeah, the tools of how the empire shapes the environment and the landscape, right? So the terraforming processes. I think, it's also like it taps into climate migration, like how we can think about climate migration in post-human terms, right? As something that actually we share with the natural worlds inside. And also, if we think about empire, if we think about also nationalism and cultural approaches to otherness in the broader sense, comes to my mind like we were talking before about how in the Calais area, after refugees have been removed, they also removed the 20 centimeters of topsoils, because in that topsoils there were a lot of specimens, either seeds or roots, that were actually brought by people there. And in order to pursue this idealistic image we have of what pure nature or pure landscape might be in a certain area, they removed this after removing the humans there. So there's these very strong resonances of different forms of violence that we can apply in there.
Definitely. I mean, you can't separate the plants from the human problem, let's say. But also, I mean, the problem is that, you know, we're educated or trained to see invasive plants or invasive species as a problem that needed to be cleaned up, removed, eradicated, and, you know, pushed away. While I think there should be a different approach of how can we live with invasive species, especially today that the climate changes, because there might be, you know, the future plants, basically. And you spoke about cleaning the soil. Actually, that's true. That's also quite common to do in the Netherlands. That's the harbor in Rotterdam. And because the Japanese knotweed problem is mainly an urban problem, it's a problem of contractors, meaning when they build a new neighborhood, a new area, they also bring a new soil to make green areas, right?
Wow,
and the first thing that pops up is the Japanese knotweed, because the soil they brought is contaminated, which means containing Japanese knotweed rhizomes and pieces of the roots.
Let's stay on the roots. I see that here you brought something that might be considered very dangerous in other contexts, although I find it very fascinating.
That's the most dangerous part of the plant, because this is how the plant moves on. But before I just move to this quickly, I want to say that, no, you can keep it. So the thing is that they, like in the harbor of Rotterdam, contractor companies, they're obliged to cleanse the soil before they moving it from one spot to another. They have to put it in something which is called heat chambers, which they heat the soil to make sure that they kill these species in the soil before they move it. These are roots, part of the roots. I mean, the roots go really deep in the earth, parts of the roots and rhizomes and a bit of the stem of the plant. In ancient China, they're used as medicine, basically, and the plant also has different names. From the place where it comes from its original area. So in Japanese, it's called itadori, which means take the pain away, because again, the plant has different uses in societal or healing uses. In Chinese, it's called something which means the tiger stick, because of the way it looks, but it's also used widely in Chinese medicine. So I just want to read a small paragraph from Sonia Shah from the Next Great Migration about the problem of about seeing migration as a problem and the way there are migration policies and restoration policies. So it says, in meadows and forests, one can sometimes find an unusual species of mushroom called Calvatia gigantea. Calvatia don't have the typical umbrella-shaped form of other mushrooms, with stalks topped by drooping spore-lined caps. Instead, they grow into massive white spheres, as large as soccer balls. Their spores build up invisibly inside them. At maturity, so-called buffable mushrooms like Calvatia become so intensely packed with spores that any minor impact, even a drop of rain, can puncture their exterior. If you poke one with a stick or give it a little kick, a smoky cloud of spores will explode from the interior, leaving behind nothing but an empty, crinkled shell. The narratives used to justify anti-migrant policies turned out to be similarly bloated and hollow, with even the lightest scratch to their surfaces, they dematerialized into a cloud of smoke.
Beautiful passage. Yeah. Thank you.
So basically, it shows us how these narratives or policies of anti-migration in species are narrow-minded. They're very exclusive. Sorry, and they're also they come from a personal way of seeing things rather than giving a holistic approach to embrace nature in its or with its changes.
And I want to hint also, like on this theme, I want to hint also to another dimension. Now you're tackling to the social and cultural, but I think there is even a temporal dimension when we look at invasive and native species, right? Because we don't know whether species that are considered national in a specific country, they are not actually migratory, results, or they reach the specific areas or geography after a migratory flow. So
no, that's true. I mean, we can also speak about our food and plants that we use in our food. Tomato, potato, chestnuts, tulips. We don't use tulips in our food. Well, they used them during the war, but these are all not from the place where they used in the culinary or the cuisine. I mean, we all know that tomato comes from Latin America, potato from America.
And tulips, as you rightly pointed out.
Can we get that? No, the wrapping paper, yeah. For instance, tulips, they're today considered a Dutch icon or Dutch cliche, if you want. If we don't want to... Yeah,
nurture certain
exactly. So
cultural
together with
understanding.
Klompen and, like windmills, bicycles, cheese, but you also have the tulips. But tulips are not Dutch originally. They were brought from the area of what is so-called today Turkey and Iran. And at that time, they were very expensive. And they have succeeded to become one of the Dutch icons or cliches or national icons because they have a credit value, which means they are healthy to the Dutch economy, which means they sell, which means they bring money or profit. While the Japanese knotweed, which was also brought as an ornamental plant originally, which was one of the Queen's favorite plants, Queen Victoria.
We saw her down here, right? We have
and which the plant also won a prize in 1850s as the best. The Japanese knotweed won the prize of the best ornamental flowering plant. Didn't succeed to become something like tulip or like other plants which are celebrated in gardens today, like hortensia, hosta, clematis, and many others, because the Japanese knotweed has a debit value, which means it costs money to get rid of it, which means it can destroy urban structures as we saw in the beginning. So that's the problem. So this takes us to our relationship with plants around us, which is, I think, we should also challenge this relationship, because we usually think or tend to think that plant is good only if we can eat it, use it, utilize it, etc., etc., and it's not good, and it's considered weed, and it should be removed when we can't do anything else. While the simplest thing that we all know, that plants and greenery in general, they contribute to our oxygen, right? They also will help with reducing the heat temperature. They provide shade. That's already services that they give us.
Yeah.
But we don't really see it. Oh.
Absolutely. And you already spoke about how in Asian countries, and we have here some Japanese knotweed tea from Japan.
That's true.
It's used also as like a medicinal substance, right? Something that can ease pain. But also, sorry, go ahead. But also I can see here that you have like a composite material, which I assume, but I'm not sure, it's from stems and from Japanese knotweed.
Yes.
So there can be like more beneficials and more like approaches to this plant which are aimed to restoration, to a mutual, like creating a mutual relation to nature and to the plants and to society as well.
Yeah, definitely. The plant could easily be used, utilized, integrated into a product or into this relationship that we usually tend to have with other plants like cotton, potato, etc. But the question is, who would like to spend and invest, to invest time and money in this storm of fight and war against Japanese knotweed, because usually it's seen as something that shouldn't be around. But that's true. In Japan, there's tea that you can drink from Japanese knotweed. People do eat it. It's not of the main courses, of course, but it's like any other, like foraging plant, let's call it. As we say in China, it's used in medicine. In a place in Ghent, in Belgium, it's called Time Lab, where I stayed for a while. They try to produce a prototype shape or material to be used in industry. And these are like, plates made from Japanese knotweed. They shred the stems, which means that this, even if it was dissolved or decayed in water, it can't become a plant because it doesn't have the rhizomes or the roots, so only the stems. And they try to mix it with nature-made glue to provide something that could be used.
Yeah.
Also, just one last thing. This book is about Japanese knotweed from Christoph Franken and Nick Kosten. And the cover is made from paper from Japanese knotweed.
I know
cardboard,
it's possible to do paper with Japanese knotweed, and I think also perhaps to get like a certain ink or to dye it
you can
as well. You get like a nice earthly color.
Yeah, you can get the dye from both the leaves and the root rhizome, and of course you can also eat the Japanese knotweed. But I have to emphasize that often in cities they're used a lot of chemicals to kill the Japanese knotweed, so I would advise people to be more careful where they pick it from if they want to eat it.
Yeah. And that's also like the intrusion of a certain cultural understanding of the plant, which might also impact like more positive in a way approaches to it. And it's very interesting because also like it's about like living on a damaged planet, as Anna Singh would call it, right? Yeah. So like all these like coexistence of like the chemicals used to kill the plants, which coexist with perhaps approaches from you, from other researchers, artists and designers who wants actually to unpack or to unveil other forms of values, of beneficial values. And it's very interesting also how it's true as you're saying that the plant is seen as a depth value or like is combined, is linked to a depth value, but at the same time, it also nurtures a certain economic flows, because I was reading before that in UK, I think around 250 million pounds a year of taxpayers' money are used in order to eradicate, to uproot, and to kill these kind of plants. So it's also like what is considered value, what is considered depth, and what is considered credit. So how we can rethink our economic relations in another way if we change our outlook towards these botanical species.
Definitely. I mean, I also heard that the municipality of Amsterdam set its budget to tackle the problem of Japanese knotweed, meaning killing it, to 8 million euros per year. Wow. Which is quite a lot. Also eradicating the plant doesn't really get rid of the plant or doesn't really kill the plant, just moves it to different places. Also, it becomes an indicator of a socioeconomical level, because in places which are marginalized, a plant or weeds which are growing are considered a poverty sign, because the authorities are not doing their jobs or giving their services to clean these areas, so plants grow next to people, houses. But this is not a new approach to invasive species and plants. I mean, this technology and war on plants. I just want to read another small paragraph from Tao Orion, Beyond the War on Invasive Species. So it says, invasive species are nothing new. Charles Elton, an animal ecologist, lived through World War II in England, where he worked to ensure that England's strictly rationed food supplies were safe from rodents, including 3 invasive species of rats and mice that had been introduced to Europe in the 11th century. Prior to the publication of The Ecology of Invasion by Animals and Plants, Elton wrote, It's not just nuclear. Elton wrote, it's not just nuclear bombs and war that threaten us. There are other sorts of explosions, and this book is about ecological explosions. The British military first tested the wartime applications of herbicides in Malaya, the Philippines, in the early 1950s to eliminate food crops of communist revolutionaries. The US military used a similar approach in a much larger scale when it applied 19 million gallons of herbicides, including 11 million gallons of Agent Orange, a mixture of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, primarily manufactured by Monsanto and Dow Chemicals in Vietnam beginning in 1962. So also eradicating plants and technologies used in the production of tanks and airplanes found new ways or uses in agricultural during wars as well. So that's not something new, and it's been used as political or war tactics.
Yeah, actually the convergence between the military sector and the ecological discourse is something known, but we don't talk enough about it actually, because they are very much entangled. Also, how I was reading how actually like the military sector in US is actually developing is very much concerned with climate change, and it's actually advancing technologies and taking this very, very seriously, while the rest of society is much more backwards in tackling this, in really like finding adaptation strategy. So it's interesting actually also like to spotlight this convergence around like botanical species as the Japanese knotweed.
Yeah, it's not only the weapons or the technological weapons, but also the language, as I said before, which resonates or reminds the language that used in more. Like, for instance, this is also another paper cutting from Dutch media, which says like money subsidy to fight against the horror plant, which is the Japanese knotweed plant. So yeah, it's or like this is an older book cover from New Zealand, and it's like states like, or the headline is the immigrant killers, and you could see who's the immigrant as solo immigrant against the nuclear family. So this image and this language has been already used.
Very interesting, like the projection of cultural standards on animal species, but it is indeed a war on this kind of this piece on the Japanese knotweed.
I mean, it is, and it's sad that it is. It's like this, that it's one direction, because I think we should really restruct and challenge the way we see things around us, not only plants, but because this also can contribute to the way we communicate and treat each other as human beings as well.
And on this, I want actually like to ask you, since we are indeed also like looking, so like Japanese knotweed is this recalcitrant species, right? It's really like reacting and fighting back. So this is why also like in some articles you have and in some conversation we had, it's like a lost war, a lost fight, the one we are having against these plants. So it's not even rational if we want to think in rational terms. But what I want to spot is, and ask you actually, how artistic research as the one you are conducting since many years can help us to counterbalance techno-scientific approaches to climate change, to the ecological emergency, and also approaches aimed at geoengineering, so at modifying and really with like the human intervention modifying ecological processes and ecological dynamics, which are uncontrollable and recalcitrant as well, so they would respond back.
Yeah, I mean, so far, none of the invented technologies to kill or to eradicate the Japanese knotweed has shown any 100% success. Let's put it like this. Temperatures are rising as well, so that's another factor which helps the plant to flourish. But however, there's this craziness on founding one fast, cheap solution to kill the plant, which is wrong, because the plant can perform different way of life, depends where. And the more you try to kill the plant, the more it gets stronger.
Resistant,
basically.
Resilient.
I forgot your question. Actually.
No, it was more a reflection. It was more a comment than a question. Yeah. But I was curious how you see like artistic research intervening in certain techno-scientific approaches to nature.
Yeah, I mean, the minimum that research or artistic research could do is to bring all this information into one place from different and various fields, right? And then it brings this information to people, because the media obviously is biased and it has one way of showing the plant, while I try to give a wider approach, and in order to make people think about the plant, about earth as well, what do we want from the earth, and how do we deal the earth. And it could ultimately occur a change, and this change doesn't need to be gigantic change in terms of like finding a solution or embracing the plant, but it could be as small as it can make people or one person look differently at the plant itself, or at the problem, or what's considered problem of Japanese knotweed. It also gives us an opportunity of accepting and investing more time in living with the plant rather than trying to find a fast solution to kill it or to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because time can change things. One of the problems why the plant is flourishing alongside the climate factors is that it doesn't have a natural enemy in Europe, while back home, I mean in Japan, it has different enemies. That's why it's not a problem there, but it also comes from there. And also in Europe, because a female specimen was brought and has been reproducing itself, killed and reproducing itself, the genes of the plant have changed in Europe, so it's more resilient to changes.
What you were saying, there was like one point that really triggered my attention, how we can look at the plant differently, how we can live, how we can live together with the plant rather than fighting against it.
I don't want to sound like someone who's promoting the plant, but I just want to bring the attention that it's a green organism living with us. It's not a monster. It's not really a threat. It could be a problem in certain places, like any other plant that can be a problem as well. But I would be happy if my research, at least, could somehow touch upon these places that make people somehow take the time and to rethink the relationship with Japanese knotweed. Because usually I just like talk about Japanese knotweed with people, and the first thing I hear from them is like, oh, that terrible plant, it shouldn't be here. But like, I would like us to think about this. And many people don't know the plant, how it looks, anything else about the plant. They just know that it's a horror plant, it's a monster that should be taken away.
All started with VOC, right? And colonialism. No, but this is a joke, which is not really a joke. But I also want to bring these, ask you about your cohabitation with the plant. And I see like these stamps that have been sent by you. Yeah. How does since you have started researching on this plant, how the plant and the materiality of the plant has been talking with you, has been fostering questions, doubts, and so what I'm asking is like really the interaction between the materiality and the being of this plant and your research and you as an artist.
Well, I have to be honest, because I'm not a designer.
No.
I don't work in the field of producing material, but my starting point was like, I have nothing against producing or people who produce things from the Japanese knotweed at all. I'm actually happy. But my approach was also to question this relationship of production. Again, it brings us back to the point like accepting a plant only when we can produce something out of it, when we can utilize it. And my approach was like, can we just live with it? Only. But also with the time, I started collecting material on the plant, but then I started to take photos of myself with the plant. I don't have any of these here, but also photographing the plant itself, growing it in containers. But recently I've been working with the stems of the plant and sanding it, looking at it as raw material, what could be used from it. And actually, this came after my time at Time Lab in Ghent, where the plates were made. So this whole terrain or field is new to me, and I'm not sure what I want to do with this, but I just wanted to show that it's possible. You could look at it as from very different angles. This could be hollow tubes. They're quite light, they're hollow. You could use them for sound, producing sound, or producing tubes or baskets, many other things. I would like to leave it to my audience.
Yeah,
to
actually,
think.
yeah, my question was really like, was not really aimed towards like, do you want to produce a final form with the plant, or are you like pursuing, but more like how I can see a lot of conceptual, a lot of discursive resources, but it's very nice to see the compresence between these like discursive elements together also with like this manual approach to sanding, which doesn't have an objective in itself, but it's more like a quest.
Yeah, it was for me kind of a spending real time with the plant itself, because when you sand, you really need. Also, like I wanted, because the plant is not, it's called knotweed, so I really wanted to see
the knots.
The knot itself, how does it look like, like with this membrane inside. It wasn't successful all the time. Sometimes it breaks easily, but then like to look at it. Yeah, and then I just wanted to touch the plant as a physical material to see what could be done, like how long does it need to dry, because when it's greener, it's heavier. What could be done? It's like it's my playground. Let's put it like this.
It's beautiful, and
I'm not intending of making a specific thing from this, like so far.
I think it's also like paying respect somehow to the entity of the plant in itself, because this approach, this manual and direct embodied approach to the plant, ask you and skip all the mediation that we have here, which is very important, but it's still a mediation by the human, right? Interpretation on interpretation that are piled up, while eventually there might be also some meanings emerging from the simple gesture of sanding, of looking, of drying, and of really like having even a sensorial approach to plant.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it was a meditative approach as well, like cutting. I mean, you need to harvest the plant, and you need to spot places where you can get it from. So you need to wait until it's dry, and to be lucky that the authorities don't cut it before. And then, you bring it back home or to your studio, and then you cut it, you look at it, you think what you could do, you find out that you can't do much with it. But I mean, others have been like really doing many things with the plant. Yeah, and then I don't know, I just sanded it to see like the layers of the plant. You could see, like it has kind of a layer, like a cover that comes out, but then like even the structure, how you feel, like it's kind of like a ritual or healing, if you want to call it like this, for me personally, that I just wanted the plant. Yeah.
Thank you, Alaa.
Thanks to you. Thanks a lot.
I think we can wrap it.
Yes.
Thank you. It was super interesting and fun.
Yeah.
Just like playing with also all these materials.
Yeah.